Hi, hi everyone. This is Elsa with my Amazing Grace podcast, or rather Facebook Live. I keep calling it a podcast. Amazing Grace is a series of conversations with contemporary women leaders who are doing extraordinary things. I have the greatest privilege of meeting all these amazing women, and so I want to bring their stories to you and also introduce them to you so that you can, learn more about their work and they can be role models for all the young girls out there. So today I'm very pleased to have with me Elpida Rouka. So welcome, Elpida. Elpida is the former chief of staff at the office of the Special Envoy for Syria, and she has worked with the UN for more than 17 years and in various important positions, which we'll talk about. But she's also my peer at the Yale World Fellows Program. Currently, we are based in New Haven. So thank you for joining in. We are running a little late because our Good Society seminar, which she did on diplomacy and conflict resolution, ran a bit longer. So we are joining in late. But welcome, Elpida.
Thank you, Elsa. Thanks so much.
And to begin, can you tell us about your name, Elpida? What does it mean? What does it make you, and who are you?
So yes, I'm Greek-born, and my name is from my maternal grandmother, who was named Elpida. She was 22 days old when, in 1922, the Greeks of Smyrna and Asia Minor were forced to flee to mainland Greece. And she was not baptized, so on the boat to mainland Greece, she was named Elpida, which means hope, in the hope that one day they will return to their lands, which they never did. But that name has stayed with me in more than one ways. It has carried me through some hardships in personal life and in professional life and conflict zones, and it always gave me the hope it's supposed to be giving me, precisely because of my grandmother's perseverance as an early day displaced person, and who all her life then became the angel's wings in protecting vulnerable populations. So I suppose I'm a bit of my grandmother. So and a bit of the rest of my grandparents, who come from northern Greece and from Greek Macedonia. So I have a bit of roots next to Alexander the Great's birthplace. So that's Elpida.
And I want to show you, what she was talking about. So this is the Elpida Hope Pin, if you can see. I'll come a little closer. And it is, can you describe this pin, Elpida?
Yes, it is basically a wave turning into an angel's wing. And it forms a heart. It was not supposed to form a heart, but it came out as a heart. And the inspiration came, as I said, thinking about my grandmother, for whom the waves brought her to a safe space in a land that protected her. But that's not the case for many migrants and refugees who have been certainly in the Greek waters in the last couple of years, drowned, and definitely perilous journeys in search of seeking a safe space, safe land. And I created this in honor of my grandmother and in support of UNHCR. So all the proceeds go to refugees, not earmarked.
So if you want your own Elpida pin, I will post in the comments section, the link how you can get it. As Elpida said, the design is hers, and she's created it based on her grandmother's story, but also the work she does with you, and the proceeds go to UNHCR. And, they are really special. So I would encourage you to reach out and get one of your own pins. She's been distributing it to all important people that we've been meeting at Yale, DC, etc. So Elpida, tell us 3 adjectives that describe you.
I will have to start with a Greek-sounding one, which is also sort of appears in my Instagram account, and I would say Elefthero-manic, which means having an irresistible desire for freedom. So Elefthero-manic. Fallible, definitely very fallible, but not lovable, but fallible. Yes. And the third one will be inspired by a poem that someone sent to me in my very dark days a couple of years ago, by William Henley, and it's called Invictus. So Invictus being the master of my ship, captain of my soul.
Mm-hmm. And those themes keep coming up. I mean, this is only the third conversation I'm having, but you know, if I look at fallible, it's actually, there's a lot of humility in it, you know, whereas in Invictus, it's about resilience and perseverance, and those are themes that I think keep coming up. But thank you for sharing. And as I continue to ask Elpida questions, if you have any questions for her, please put it in the comments section and we'll try and answer them. So when you were growing up, you wanted to actually join the National Geographic, but you ended up at the UN. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. Well, yes, I always had a sense of adventure, and based also very much on our parents gave us a global life of travel and experiences, and I did a lot of traveling in Kenya, and also a lot of wildlife management when I was in college. So, you know, travel and animals and wildlife became a wonderful obsession, as was photography. So what better combination of sort of bringing it all together. So when I graduated from the School of International Public Affairs in Columbia University, my parents, on Masters of International Affairs, my parents were asking me, so where are you going to go and what do you want to do? And I said, well, journalism, but what I meant was National Geographic, a little bit more sort of, as I say, I was thinking more like the English patient combination with Sebastian Junger and kind of stuff. But then instead of that, I stumbled into the UN. That very summer, I was in an alumni reception, and I ran into my future, what became boss, and UN was born. So timing and luck, I suppose, define your course in life.
And looking back, you know, I mean, when you look at the kind of places that the UN took you to, Afghanistan, and then Jerusalem, Syria, Iraq, these are, you know, what are considered dangerous countries to a normal citizen. How hard or easy was it for you as a woman to go there, or even as a person to go there? And as a young person, you went there when you were pretty young.
Yes. So I entered the UN very young. I was 23 when I entered the UN, and I was 29 when I went to the field. And I guess a little bit of the adventurous spirit and also the elements that has from my upbringing of my grandparents, that, you know, some people have to chase windmills and Don Quixotic as they may be. How hard was it? Well, it does come at a personal cost. You know, it's not as a person. I would address the woman in a second. You sacrifice family, personal life, so it's not so easy. But it's a conscious choice to be out there, believing in the cause of why you're there and helping the peoples but despite the personal cost, there's so many things that sort of compensate for that, because you meet incredible people and people who inspire you, because for them, you know, the courage to create and imagine comes out of necessity of their daily lives. So I've made, you know, lifelong friendships with Iraqis, Afghans, Syrians. So it's part of who I suppose we've always been, and, you know, also again my upbringing, my grandmother being from Asia Minor. I grew up in Thessaloniki, which was one of the most cosmopolitan cities in the 19th century. You know, Jews, Pomaks, sort of Greeks, Turks, just about everything. So, as a woman, it's also been very interesting to me, because I work for the sort of peace and security side of the UN. So one would wonder, you know, how do you deal with being at the negotiating table and being the only woman? And in fact, it has been an asset more than anything else. It has been an asset in Iraq. Also, Iraq is a very, very, very strong negotiators, but they, in some ways, also approach a woman in a different way. They share different stories than than they would do with a man at the table. Same goes for Afghanistan, because I suppose women, international women, were seen as a different category as opposed to national women. So it has been an asset, but as I said, personal cost comes with the story.
And that's what, in DC we met, thanks to you, Ambassador Molly Fee, and she actually reinforced that if you're a woman who travels a lot on work, it is a rough ride when it comes to your personal life, and you really need a supporting family system to, maintain that and support your career as well. Talking about you were the only woman at the table, and I have written several articles about the need for women at the table when they make these policies and peace processes, etc. And yesterday, was it on Monday when you had your Blue Innovation panel at Yale, you mentioned about how for Syria, you helped create the space for women to be there, and they were a very important stakeholder group. Can you share a little bit about that? Because, often we think that women are completely cut off from the process. So maybe, it'll give us hope to hear that there are initiatives like that.
Absolutely. So the current UN Special Envoy for Syria, Stefan de Mistura, has always been not just on Syria, but also when we work together in Afghanistan, be a firm supporter that women have to be involved in peace processes from the early stages, in all kinds of peace processes, not just when you end up in the negotiating table or afterwards.
Right from the start.
From the start. Be it in legislative processes. I mean, in Afghanistan, he spent first couple of months of our mission there insisting on the 69 women quota in the parliament, and we got that and more.
Wow.
So, he is very, very strong about, he does what he preaches, right? On Syria, he, 2016, decided to learn from the past sort of, let's say, mistakes or inadequacies on the negotiation process. For example, in Geneva II, there were no women delegations, so there were not enough women in the respective binary negotiations of the Syrian parties. So he has been very, very vocal about it and put it in statements and Security Council briefings that every delegation of Syrians coming to Geneva for talks have to have at least 30% of women in it. And the same applies now to what's called the Constitutional Committee that's about to be set up. But more importantly, there was a new innovative preventive tool, which is called the Women Advisory Board. So he decided that he's a special envoy, he can have any advisors that he wants and experts around him. So his advisory board became 12 Syrian women from very diverse backgrounds and political affiliations and views, who also utilize their networks within and outside Syria to inform him on all kinds of issues that are on the negotiating table. So it's also a preventive mechanism, and also a conflict resolution, and also building a peace constituency for the future.
Great. And we couldn't live stream Elpida's panel on Monday, which was on the blue innovations at the UN, which she did with Rita Sharia. But maybe you can just give a little bit of gist of what are the innovations that you are proud of that the UN has, instituted, because a lot of people are very interested in that, and we couldn't live stream it.
Yes, so I come from the diplomacy side of the UN, so the most obvious innovations come from, you can see in agencies, funds and programs. So for example, UNOSAT uses satellite imagery to map conflict and migration and assist with humanitarian assistance. UNHCR uses sort of biometrics, in order to sort of gauge refugee movements. You also have WFP uses vouchers, but in this diplomacy side of things, it's not very it's not very frequent that people talk about innovation. So a small but not so small example I used was the use of WhatsApp in the context of monitoring the cessation of hostilities out of a UN-run operation center in Geneva back in 2016 when the Americans and Russians had sponsored the cessation of hostilities. And essentially we had an email hotline when people, parties to the ceasefire could report in violations. And most importantly, we had a WhatsApp group with the commanders who were party to the cessation of hostilities. So I could be in a room with 24 member states, including Americans and Russians and Turks, Iranians, Saudis, Qataris, everyone who had influence on the respective parties. And suddenly we'll get a WhatsApp message from a commander up in the mountains saying, so such and such thing is happening right now. We heard of an airstrike, and he essentially was featuring in the middle of the active negotiation of or the monitoring of the cessation of hostilities, and then respective member states with influence would step out and try and deconflict the situation. So a deconflicting mechanism more so than preventing it.
And if I remember rightly, you were in charge of 17 or 18 WhatsApp groups?
Pretty much.
I mean, how do you manage that? I find WhatsApp to be noisy, but I found it very interesting that you actually used WhatsApp as a medium for, real-time information whilst these negotiations were on.
That's right, because at any given point in time, you have different rooms dealing with different stakeholders. So you would have Syrian parties separately in proximity talks. You will have the international community in a different room. You'll have the operation center monitoring and you'll have to be actively feeding back information from one room to the other by way of also getting live input in whatever negotiation was happening. It's a little bit crazy, but but it worked miraculously. It does work, yeah.
And you also mentioned e-mediation.
Yes.
So what is e-mediation?
Yes.
That was the first time I ever heard of something like that.
Well, it's something that's still being sort of in the making. The Secretary General was Secretary General Guterres in June 2018 in Helsinki when he announced a high-level mediation panel. He also encouraged us in the UN mediation to come up with a toolkit of how to leverage technology by way of affecting effective mediation and proactive creative solutions. So we have our UN headquarters partnering up with a lot of think tanks in Geneva and cyber mediation and all kinds of things in order to influence conflict mapping and analysis, shaping of communications, digital or virtual negotiations, and inclusiveness. How do we ensure in national dialogues we actually have that? And of course, big data have been used in all kinds of ways to prevent conflicts or prevent sort of humanitarian disasters. So it's still an evolving mechanism for all of us, but it's something that the Secretary General feels very strongly about, and it's it's the new world.
Yeah. So
although I must say, I admit I do agree with Bill Burns that there's no alternative to good old-fashioned face-to-face diplomacy. But in a world where you have such diffused power relations and where stakeholders are beyond the immediate sort of territorial confines of a certain country where the conflict exists, you need to figure out how all these voices come in.
And also, it's an inclusive way of getting all those voices in, because you can't have everybody in the room all the time. And look at us, we are sitting at Yale, but we are broadcasting your wonderful story, and so many more people will get to hear about your work. Everybody can't come to the panels at Yale, but using social media, which is low tech, you can actually have more people part of the dialogue. And I feel we need to have these conversations in a larger way, but in a more constructive way, so that, social media can be seen as a force for good. We only tend to highlight how fake news is spreading, but we can obviously share the good practices and the good work that is being done, everywhere. So the UN has such a mixed reputation. It does I don't know if you can imagine a world without the UN, but we also, throw a lot of stones at the UN saying that they are ineffective. But looking back at your career and your long, distinguished career, what is the one thing that you're most proud of? I know it's hard.
Well, it's hard because we just had this Good Society seminar where I talk about highs and lows. And it is hard to talk about successes, or successes is not a word, but highs, let's say, in diplomacy. And because we tend to always look at the crisis of any given moment, the conflict going on, as opposed to, so the most invisible thing in the UN is conflict prevention. And I will repeat what I said earlier today, that's one of my proudest moment, I suppose, is my involvement with the UN mission in Iraq back in 2007, when the mission was involved to prevent the, at that time, Arab-Kurdish conflict within Iraq, which was dormant, prevent it from escalating and sort of try to diffuse tensions, which was at the time that there was an article in the Constitution where the Iraqi Kurds were hoping to regain some of the fault lines and disputed territories of Iraq that go from Mosul to Diyala. And the UN, with the buy-in of all stakeholders, of Iraqi stakeholders, stepped in and provided a face-saving solution, also putting the referendum in a political settlement and diffusing the heat from what's called Kirkuk, which is the main city up in the disputed fault lines, by addressing the broader issues of administrative jurisdiction of those areas. And we came up with the 500 pages report addressing all 15 areas, which is still on the table for a higher level dialogue amongst Iraqi parties.
Well, I hope somebody looks at it and does something about it. Well, if you were to look back, would you do anything differently?
I sometimes I say yes, and then sometimes I think probably not, because otherwise I wouldn't be where I am.
Yeah, that's true.
I was saying today, it's interesting how all these stories come together. Now that I think back at it, and how where I was at any given point in time when certain conflict was unfolding influenced how I was when I was working on that conflict. So I think not. I don't say with certainty, but today I say I think not. So.
Well, I'm glad, because we need more people like you in the UN. But coming back to, how hard it is to be in these conflict zones and how hard it is to, be in these places where you could have, all kinds of things going on. So this month, October, is the Mental Health Awareness Month, and I know you're passionate about mental health as well. So can you share with us how you have, what are the strategies you have employed for yourself to keep yourself sane in this world of conflict? And, when we are talking about the regions that you've lived in, they are extreme conflict.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I haven't deployed many effective strategies because 2 years ago I suffered severe depression and PTSD, and I was voluntarily hospitalized for 4 months. I'm also a survivor of a terrorist attack on the UN in 2003 in Baghdad, and that has marked me as well, emotionally, and metaphorically and literally. The question that the first responder at the clinic told me is like, why didn't you come here earlier? In your line of work, you should have been able to detect the symptoms. And the truth is, I didn't, and we were not taught to detect those symptoms. I should say that very timely, 2 days ago, the Secretary General appointed an Assistant Secretary General on mental health well-being on the line of duty within the UN, which I think is a very important step, long overdue. And his Assistant Secretary General himself, who's a friend, had a very powerful YouTube message the first time revealing his PTSD of years back in the day. After my sort of now recovering from severe depression and PTSD, coping mechanisms, art therapy, art therapy more than talk therapy, but this is what, writing, sort of blurting everything out on a blank canvas, but more importantly, learning to listen to my body, because the body does keep the score, and to what I call hashtag seize the awkward, which is something also online people should look at. Seize the awkward. Just talk to anyone who is willing to listen. As I said, we're sometimes a little bit insensitive or blind to things going on with our fellow humans and fellow workers. And for those of us who work in hardship posts, we get a little too caught up with keeping going and being workaholics in so many ways. But unless we step back and start healing a little bit our own, I don't know how we'll be able to continue with the work that's presumably aimed at healing the communities we're trying to serve.
So, I think those who are working on the front lines of any kind of conflict or working in the field on social issues, please take some time off for self-care. It's very important. Seize the awkward. Seize the awkward is what Elpida recommends you check out. It's very important that you take that time off, because we tend to, miss out. We want to give ourselves to others and for the cause, but we tend to neglect, and then, like Elpida said, the body catches up. Elpida, so are you enjoying your time at Yale? Is this helping you recover? I'm going to check if there are any Facebook messages.
Elsa is helping me recover. Yes, no, I am, and in more unexpected ways than I thought. But it is important, particularly on, as I just said, since we're talking about mental health and other things. These are issues that are also very relevant. We've seen them in the last 2 months that we're here on a campus.
Yes.
So I have been very encouraged by people who come up and want to share their stories and or want me to share my story further by way of, I suppose, helping reflect on issues and having people relate. It's the relating part.
Okay, so I think we have one comment. Frances Jeffrey says that today is the 73rd anniversary of the UN, so she thanks you for the good work that you've been doing.
Thank you, that's very nice.
Yeah, and so, my final question is, what is your advice to the young girls out there who are watching and who want to be like you?
Anything is possible. That's my advice. Anything is possible. I think don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And it may not be all planned out or sketched out, and they're going to be highs and lows and step backs, and what does it take, 2 steps back and 1 leap forwards. But the only other thing I'd say, anything is possible, but don't rush to do everything all at once. There's time. So breathe a little bit now and enjoy life.
And if someone out there wants to join the UN, a young person wants to join the UN, I know you've been talking on campus about how young people can get involved. So what would your advice be?
My advice would be, I think, first get some sort of real life experience out there. I had a guest, my first guest actually here was asked, a UN special envoy for Somalia was asked, what's your advice on how I get into humanitarian, international humanitarian world of international humanitarian affairs? And his answer is like, well, start by next door and see if that's the thing for you. Start by, we're in New Haven, go to New Haven Green and start getting involved with this kind of issues, and then see. It's not all about being exported to an international sort of arena. So my advice is experience first, and then also see if the UN is the thing for you.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, and thank you, Elpida,
Thank you.
for joining us today and sharing your experiences. If you enjoy this, please share it and leave your comments in the comment section. If Elpida is already tagged on it, so she can respond whenever she has the time. But thank you, and do give us your feedback.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Elsa. Bye, guys.